more than 125 million that would come in that number, because we looked at, I think there was a vote by the group for the added additional 100 million to contingency, and then we had looked at the next thing for what we were going to do with and then what we would do for additional projects, had those numbers coming in, and that's where we landed. So I think what I'd like to do a bit this morning is get a sense of the group of just in general, a little bit of a conversation about what are those priorities. Again, we had looked at 100 million for contingency. We now have 25 million apparently to play with in the pessimistic outlook on this. What's the thinking of the group about allocation of those dollars, or where we might go next?
Madam Chair, if you don't mind, we have a few slides for you, just updates based on the previous conversation. If you don't mind, we'll run through those slides, and that may help generate some questions and additional discussion. So with your permission, we'll run through the slides first. Go ahead.
Got it. Okay. As we talked about, and Jan, as you saw, we let in, we got our updated revenue projections plugged up into what you'd seen last time, which was the cash flow analysis based on the variety of scenarios and carrying the different debt service levels on there. So we plugged that in. We're using the latest and greatest numbers, and as Farhad said, it's an increase of roughly about 125 million. The key thing to note on that, and several times that got discussed at the last meeting, which is how does that compare with the updated on the cost estimates? So we put everything in 2023 dollars. So that's where the cost estimate work was done, and the numbers we've been working off of. We then conflated or nominalized the revenue projection to line up with that. So we're all talking apples in a 2023 timeframe on that. And as Farhad mentioned, we plugged in the 100 million for the economic and inflationary contingency, and then we ran this across the variety of scenarios that we've got. Just getting started, Mike. So this was a recap. We looked at the CAC plan option, continuing to use the jurisdiction suggested delivery scenario, which is a very aggressive, upfront loaded. Have a lot of the projects occurring in parallel on that. And so carrying the 50 million that was identified at last time's meeting, as well as the 77 that was identified by the CAC, we still show a negative cash balance out there, roughly starting in right approximately halfway through the plan on that. So as you can see, the lines in gray that fall below the 0 mark, that's where we go into the negative in there with cash flow. So that's CAC option, looking at the jurisdiction preferred delivery timeframes, and then across the two different debt service options, 50 and 77. Now, if we go to the 100 million, last time we showed you that this did work, and we were able to confirm this still does work over the life of the plan, and we're still able to fulfill the delivery timeframe as allocated and as requested. So the $100 million option still does work under all these, or under the increased revenue projections. Going down to the TMC plan option, same thing, looking at the 37 million that have been identified, as well as the 50 that was discussed at the last meeting. Those gray lines are still present. We are still showing a negative cash flow on that associated time frame allocation. And then with the 100 million, it's still a positive cash flow. However, it's overdrawn by approximately 29 million. We've made a categorical item allocation adjustment last time. We reestablished that to show that basically there's got to be 29 million that comes out of the plan somewhere to get within a positive overall balance. The cash flow stays in the above line positive nature of it, but essentially we have to true up 29 million at the end. And this is with the $100 million debt service. So basically $100 million allocation is still needed to support the CAC TMC plan under the more aggressive delivery scenario. What that does is it builds you options. You now have the capability of delivering on the most aggressive plan laid out. And then going back to what we talked about last time, this is still a tool that's available for use by the jurisdictions and by the board to decide. So it's not an automatic. It can then be used and tailored to how the delivery pans out, how everything progresses, how the overall plan comes together. So that's all going to be specifically decided at that point in time as the projects get underway and as we see how the overall production is going to come out. And then as we mentioned last time, The $100 million debt service that's been utilized in the current plan or whatever variation we had in there. And that's continued to make sure that that gives us the top end rating so that we get the most favorable interest rates and have the most opportunistic time frame there associated with that delivery. So that was the simple, sweet update from last time as we ran all those scenarios, looked at those evaluations under the increased revenue, but essentially it didn't really change the outcome. 100 million is still what's needed. That far out, or Mike, I'll turn it back to you or Jen.
Well, thank you for that. Again, as you had requested, we did obviously look at the phasing of the projects, and they're relatively reasonable, but just as an additional note, the only other way to address that negative cash flow at the end of the program would be to delay scheduling of those projects, mostly in periods 3 and 4.
Apologize for being a few minutes late. Questions, comments, thoughts from anyone?
Rick, or I was looking at the study and the memo you sent out as part of this packet. I see that Eller projected the revenues in terms of 2023 dollars. But back in 2022, when you all had done this study before to come up with the 2.3 billion, it was done in 2024 dollars. Can you help me understand the difference there?
Yeah, of course. So at the time, we had anticipated that it's likely after the election, the new fiscal year for starting of the new tax would be in 2024, and the cost estimate would be updated in 2024. Obviously, once the board decided to establish the 25 calendar for the election, so now we know exactly July of 2021 can be used for start of the tax. So that's for the revenue projection side. And then as Rick just mentioned, cost estimates and revenues have to be in the same present value. So present worth comparison for apples to apples comparisons. You can adjust one and then you have to adjust the other one. So instead of doing that, you just deflate it back to the same year as the cost estimate. So everything is in the same year now.
You're talking about the cost estimates that HDR did for the
Current cost estimates, yes.
Other questions or comments?
Sure.
So Farhad, you said that the phasing is reasonable. So I know that when we left off, there was some discussion, you asking jurisdictions to look at phasing. And I think the committee had also asked if RTA staff could take a look at phasing. And so was there an exercise done to demonstrate how the cash flow deficit could be eliminated by adjusting phasing? Has that been?
Yeah, so the way I understood the discussion was, is phasing reasonable from our perspective? And yes, it is. So I would not recommend changing the phasing extensively unless somebody is willing to adjust the phasing. So our recommendation on the phasing is that's reasonable. Now to go back and see what scenario would make it pencil out. So the options are add 25 to bonding. So that's one option, or push at least, I would say, about $150 million worth of expenditures out so you can balance that out. So we kind of did that without identifying which project.
I'm going to differ a little bit. I thought that the exercise was for you to go through and show us what that would look like.
Yeah.
No, but I mean, in terms of real projects and did I miss that last?
No, that was,
Yeah.
I thought,
We
okay,
did that. So the graphics you have is the outcome of that exercise and
Of the phase.
of the phasing, yes.
like, so we understand we're at a bit of a crossroads. If we insist on 100 million, then what we've presented by way of phasing works. But if we, well, according to this.
No, you're right.
But if we don't, if we don't want to do 100 million, if the group collectively says, hey, we're only comfortable at 75 million or 50 million, what does the schedule need to look like the program schedule need to look like for that to work? Like what projects need to go where?
So again, we stopped at deciding which project, but from a dollar amount perspective, it's period 3 and 4, and if you move roughly about $150 million out to the end of the program, then you can achieve that.
Does staff have a sense or an opinion on what projects could move out? I mean, outside of the opinion of the jurisdictions, what projects could move out to make a $50 million allocation work or $75 million allocation work?
Yeah.
Maybe that's a different way of asking.
Obviously, we could make recommendations, but like I said, we looked at it, everything seems reasonable. They're all in a reasonable 5-year periods. The one exercise would be to say, instead of start at the beginning of the period, start at the end of the period. So some of those decisions have to be made with individual sponsors. So can we make it pencil out? We could, but can I tell you which project? I don't have a recommendation on which project until I have that conversation with individual sponsors.
Thank you.
Sure. There's been a lot of discussion between pessimistic or baseline and what the city might have as revenues. Is it possible that we know it appears that we'll have an additional started the discussion. Could we continue with the allocation of 100 million to contingency, add the 25 million to debt service, snap a line, and then say anything that comes in between baseline and or additional revenues go to a list of projects sort of in order as additional monies come in, which could then, in order to benefit perhaps the city of Tucson, since you were looking at the main additional projects to be made whole. So if the 125 goes to what I think of as sort of the fiscal buckets, where we had, and at the last meetings, we talked about we can either decrease expenditures or increase revenues. We weren't decreasing expenditures, so we looked at a way to increase revenues. Now we can fill them with those buckets and then let some established line of priority from that point forward for additional.
Correct. Yes, that was my understanding of the proposal from Sarita to do exactly that. So if you want to, and that's in your packet as well. So that's pretty much the scenario that was proposed by Sarita at the last meeting. That if you want to assume a more a higher growth rate for the revenue, then you can have a set aside projects that would benefit from that revenue.
The numbers that the U of A presented to us puzzled me a little bit in terms of interpretation. So originally, we were using a $2.34 billion budget.
Correct.
What was that based on from the U of A? What was the number? Because this one showed 3.1 billion. And then you discounted it into $2023.
To match the cost
So
estimate.
$2023. And I would like to understand when we did the original budget, what was that number that you then discounted back?
I don't have the number. Do you have the original?
Yes, Mr. Chair, Farhad, thanks. Question. So the $2.34 billion was the sum of revenues from fiscal year 25 to fiscal year 2044 on the pessimistic older version of the forecast. And so that's the number we've been working with through committee. So that's what we've assumed is the starting point here. We did adjust that up to reflect fiscal years 26 through 2045, I think it was, to kind of align more with where we see the schedule going for RTA next. And so that would have increased the revenues. So we discounted that back to 2.34 billion to continue to work with that number without having to go back and revise a bunch of stuff. So that's what we're comparing to in the new forecast, as you note, Mr. Chair.
So again, if you keep it in mind.
Hold on, wait. So you said you discounted it back. What was the total number that you used to discount that?
It would have been the sum. I don't recall the number off the top of my head. I could find that out for you, but it would have been the sum of the annual forecast on the old forecast from fiscal year 26 through fiscal year 2045.
Because that number would have probably have to be close to 2.9 billion in order to discount it back to 2.3 if we use the same proportion. So 3.1 billion discounted down to 3.4. and change, right? So it would seem to me that that number would have to be 2.9. I'd like to see that and understand how you. Go ahead, did you have a point?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, so again, it's a fixed 20-year period. With the old estimate, it had started in fiscal year 25. With the new estimate, it's starting in fiscal year 26, so there's a variation between those two. And then the main point that George wanted to make was that at the time when he was doing the old forecast, he had assumed a recession coming in potentially 24, 25. And so his adjustment, the starting point was lower than it is now. So he has adjusted his starting point to be higher and then his projection for growth. So that's where you see the $125 million total when you deflate it back to the current present value. And I think that's the part that confuses everybody, is that you can add up the total, and if you add up the total today without deflating back to present value, it is 3.1 billion. But you have to deflate it back to present value, and that's where the 2.46 is coming from.
So I appreciate that. It doesn't confuse me at all. What I'm asking is the original 2.34 billion was based on what total?
Yeah,
That was then discounted back. And I'd like to see that report so that because I want to compare it. It doesn't make sense to me, quite frankly. I think the 125 seems low. And that's why I'm questioning it.
so we can send the whole report out to everybody if you like. You've had it before. It was in your
I'm sure
packet
we've had it. It's
previously.
been a long time though, but I'd like to see it.
Yeah,
I think
sure.
its value,
Sure, we'll
and
send it out.
understanding. It just seems that 125 is low. That's all.
Yep.
Sam, we got a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was going to tell you that I do have a copy of the old report, and that number was the projected yield for the RTA, thousands of nominal dollars. So these are nominal dollars. Pessimistic scenario was
There
2.855
you go.
billion
Yep.
for the period of 2023 through 2042.
So the growth then is from 2.85 to 3.1 and discounting it back. Is that what I'm hearing?
One thing
Say
that
it again.
So we discounted, or you all discounted the 2.85 down to 2.34 based on those years' dollars, 22 of it. And now we've got 3.1 discounted down to 2.4 change. Is
2.46, correct. Yes.
that right?
Yes.
But Mike, one thing to note is that the 2.34 was discounted to $24. The 2.46 is discounted to $23. So that's a
Again, to
nuance.
match the cost estimates. Otherwise you would have to increase the cost estimates again.
Why did you discount the 2.34 to $24?
Because at the time we anticipated an election to be later and our cost estimate would come in later in the process. But through this process, we all decided we wanted the cost estimate to come much earlier, and it did in 2023. It was just the timing of the cost estimate. So now we're
So
matching.
wouldn't it make sense then to discount this to 25?
We're matching the cost estimate timing. Whatever is the timing
But
of the
you did
cost
that before. I'm just curious. It just
Yeah, that's
seems-
all I'm
I'm trying
saying.
to understand it.
So the cost side and the revenue side have to be in the same year. Now we have cost that's in 2023, so the revenue has to be discounted back to
When are you
2023.
going to update the plan?
We're not going to, this is our basis.
No update on cost?
No more, yeah. So again, it's all relative, right? So even if you update the cost, then now you are going to credit back another year to the revenue. So both of them have to be adjusted again if that's what we do.
Mr. Chair, May 2. So for the old forecast, the 2.3, I'm getting all my numbers confused now. The old one was 2.43, correct? And so that was summing up on a $2024 basis, fiscal years 25 through 2044. And so now we've taken that and we've kind of called it, without doing anything, this is a $2023 as we've been going through these various meetings. So by the virtue of the fact of taking a constant dollar that was in 2024 dollars under the old forecast and now labeling that a 2023 dollar, that actually is kind of being a little bit optimistic in and of itself, since presumably 2023 dollars are less on a constant basis and certainly on a nominal basis than 2024, just with the growth that we've seen in the last couple of years. So once again, that 2.43 or whatever the last number we were looking with was, is on a constant dollar basis, 2024 dollars.
Thoughts, comments? Secretary, and make a proposal or a thought, any comments on that?
Sure. Can I ask Rick to go back over the different plan cash flow scenarios? Can we see those one more time?
Absolutely. I'll take you back to the CAC one first with the 50 and $77 million allocations.
And Rick, if I may interrupt, this has $100 million in contingency.
Correct. Then going forward, same thing, CAC, this is now the $100 million debt service with everything in and above the line. And then looking at the TMC plan option, this is the 37 originally identified plus the 50. And holding constant the delivery timeframe. And then the 100 million shows positive cash balance, but overall net, we got to true it up at the end. So we've got to find a $29 million cut somewhere to make the math totally work out. The timeframe delivery service works.
Hey, Rick,
Yes, sir.
the 29 million is assuming the debt service payments. You got to make up those debt service payments as cost cumulatively. And last year, you got to make up 29 million because we don't have enough.
Correct. Under that scenario, you would have to adjust $29 million.
Yeah, 29 million in the plan. That's, yeah, sorry, Mike. Carmine, does that help, or did you want to go back to a specific one?
I didn't. No, that's okay. Thank you.
Good. So the next one is, I'm sorry, the previous one. One more, please. Okay, so this is the one that we talked about. So it's balanced and it assumes that we can increase the debt service by that extra $25 million.
Going back to the CAC plan option removes us from where this body left off in adopting the TMC modified plan. So we're undoing a bunch of projects in going back to this plan. So I just want to highlight that. So we have to add debt service to get from where we last left off a conversation about having 50 million. So we need to add 50 million to debt service and to take a lot of stuff off to go back there. So for me, it seems like we're moving away from potentially arriving at a consensus here, right? We had, for all intents and purposes, unanimous vote. We had one non-jurisdictional member vote against the TMC modified plan. And so, you know, I would suggest that maybe we focus the conversation on the TMC modified plan in those scenarios that are in the subsequent slides here. And, you know, we see 100 million in debt service, you still have to take 29 million out of the plan. So there's 50 million, you got a bunch more years with negative cash flow. There's not a 75 million shown on there, right? We followed what Janet suggested in saying, okay, if we've got 125 million, do we take 100, put that in debt service and then add the 25 million somewhere else? If we added that to debt service, that gets us to 75. And then what is that negative cash flow in the out years? So it's bigger than 29. So that assumes though we still have in that TMC modified plan 75 million regional funds. And we didn't have a deep discussion about that last time around. We spent a lot of time on debt service and contingency, not so much on the regional fund contribution into the plan.
So go ahead, yeah, please.
I'm just noting that apparently then we have the TMC.
Yeah, and I was going to say, if I understood your comment correctly, the previous slide, if you don't mind, go back. So the one with 37 and 50, 50 was the one that we discussed last time. that-
Right, and I was saying if it was 75 million, right, it would be in between the negative cash flow, right, shown on
Oh, yeah.
50 million and 100 million, right?
Yeah, and we did that previously before the 50 million was discussed. It was still a negative cash flow, but it was a smaller one, right?
So the bottom line for me is that I supported the $50 million debt service based on trying to put in that placeholder for cash flow. I also challenged the scheduling of the projects. And that's where I stand. And I wouldn't support going up. I think the needs are greater out there. And the debt service simply pushes it back for us to be able to deliver earlier rather than waiting. That's kind of the only reason to do it. Now, if there's an economic reason, great, and I think that the model should definitely be outlined and show that. So if we in fact both save money, then the plan would be better off. But if we're spending money to get into that makes it hard for people to support. So I'm good with the 50 million. I think that was a reasonable compromise last time. Some way I would like to support you in the different direction. Go ahead, Carmine. Gary? Go ahead, Gary.
So I'm curious from staff's perspective, let's say a project, I'm using hypotheticals here so that I can get a clearer picture of the difference between 50 million of bond capacity and 100 million of bond capacity. Because I'm not sure that I agree with Mike, but I'm willing to consider it. So probably, I mean, one of the larger projects in the region is Cotero and I-10, right? And what we're working toward right now is to have a plan ready to go so that when the new RTA next is voted in, and I'm being optimistic here, that we're ready to rock and roll with that project. How can we deliver that project of roughly $200 million without bonding capacity of 100 million? If it's only 50 million, I'm doing the math in my head and it doesn't add up to me. So that's kind of where I'm at right now. And if staff has, you know, a way that, you know, we can look at that differently and deliver a project like that rather than waiting until 2030 for that plan, or for that project, I don't know.
Again, if you would, I may respond to that.
Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you.
And then I think Carmine.
So again, if you recall, on the right-hand side, you got the two peaks on the expenditure side. Both of those peaks are the expenditures on the two TIs. And the reason for that, as you recall, was that ADOT requires payment upfront. So we would have to bond for both of those projects at two different times to pay those upfront. And that by themselves, they're about 200 a piece, right?
Carmine, and then Shane. No, did you have a specific comment on that one?
Well, I have a specific comment regarding Cotero. I don't know what order you want to go in.
Go ahead and.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Farhad's right in terms of the funding, but there's a kind of an unseen aspect to this with about half of the funding for a project like Cotero, that it's going to come out of the designated federal funds in the PAG region, which have to then be programmed through the PAG board. So Farhad's right that, you know, a little less than half of the, right now it's currently 75 million, has to be funded and bonded, but that extra 125 million has to come out of a set budget. So how that gets allocated is done by PAG. RT or ADOT makes suggestions on that, but there's going to be something's going to have to shift. Some other ADOT project is going to have to shift to move that up there. And that's a discussion to have with the PAG board. I just want to make sure that that was also a known.
Thank you. Carmine.
Well, I'd like to get into the details of how to eliminate the negative cash flow. And if we look at the graph on the right, that's the $50 million debt service. If we were to add 25 million to that, how does that affect years 10, 11, right after we go negative? How does that affect that? And then I think we need to have a conversation today, and if we need to pause and get the phasing list so that we all have that in front of us. If we add 25 million to debt service and we smooth out the phasing so that we're taking projects in years, right, 6, 7, 8, 9, and moving them, and then doing the same, right? If we're moving stuff out, that I'd be interested in seeing how many projects do we have to move out in how many phases in order to get cash flow positive in there, right? I think that's important for us to try and do today.
I think that's what you asked for last time.
So, Mr. Chair, this is the proposed scheduling by sponsor, if you don't mind, take one and pass. So as we discussed last time,
So-
there are none in period 4, and nobody recommended making any adjustment. Yes.
Why don't we let Shane had a comment, and then that way everybody will get a chance to get this. Go ahead.
No, I think so. I echo the same sentiment. It'd be interesting. I would suggest as a starting point for the conversation, perhaps RTA staff actually take a stab at suggesting projects to move so that we can, I hate to put you guys on the spot, but that way you're actually looking at the exact dollar number that you need to move, and you're pairing that up as close as you can with projects that, that we can consider to move out to, to round that off and give us that's positive.
If I may, again, so the schedule we have in front of you, the individual sponsors, suggestion, they're all mostly in period 1 and 2. There's only 1 or 2 that may overlap in period 3, and there's none in period 4. So realistically, for us to recommend to move anything, we're recommending to move something from period 1 to period 4. And I just don't feel that I have enough information to make that recommendation without the sponsors telling me why they thought they want to go in period 1. We're talking 10, 15 years of difference in moving some of these projects. So,
If I can just point out a couple of things here. Those first 4 are not jurisdiction recommended. That was a commitment by the RTA board to do that. But I think it's not fair to say that is a jurisdiction recommendation. It's not. That's as far as moving projects, I guess I would suggest, I don't know that I would move projects from the 1st to the 4th. Why can't we just slide?
That's your pleasure, but we don't have anything in 3, we don't have anything in 4, so you're moving from 1 and 2 to 3 and 4. If you want to slide it, decide which ones you want to slide, and we can run the model.
We never really answered Terry's question though about the debt service. I want to explore that just a little bit. Terry, I think my understanding is that the 50 million is the payment on the debt, not the issuance. And so that gives us a budget on which to pay debt service, issuance costs as well as debt service. So the budget for the project is still within the program itself. And so when that's issued, it's really a function of our ability to deliver it. That it's not a function of issuing a $100 million or that number. It's limiting what you issue for your project. And I think that's a function of schedule. Also, when we issue it. But
I get that, totally understand that, but that's not the only project, right?
No, I understand,
There's
but
a whole bunch of other
I
projects.
understand, but I was trying to address your concern about the TI. I think that's a function of schedule and when we're ready. And then we can move it on.
Well, to add to that, cash flow. If we don't have the cash flow, then you have the bond cost.
But there's cash flow on both sides of the equation. There's cash flow on the RTA side for this particular project. But there also is cash flow in the ADOT PAG program that has to be acknowledged, which is what I was trying to emphasize before.
So the PAG side of it would be more complicated than this, but yes.
Shane?
Farhad, staff reached out to all the jurisdictions and said, hey, are there any other additional considerations on scheduling, right? That was kind of an exercise. I know that we responded to that. I think we suggested perhaps some changes in schedule. Did other people also reflect that? Because I'm not sure that's reflected on this list.
No, this list, we had just done it as a follow-on to kind of look at those scenarios. And we had touched base with you guys and you recommended reversing the order of Pima and La Vita due to some development activity, I think that was ongoing. So we made that change, but we didn't hear anything back from any of the others on their schedule, timing, phasing. A lot of it that we were looking at lined up with what was originally suggested, but we were also looking and balancing some other aspects as well.
Mr. Chairman, are you looking for us to suggest what we would?
Yeah, I don't know that we could do that sitting here around the tables, my gut. But knowing that this is the list and maybe we come back with some thoughts on what that looks like. Now, what would be helpful, if you can put that slide back up that has the cash flow, TMC cash flow. What would be helpful is to understand what the budget is or the goal is on an annual basis. For the $50 million debt service, assuming we stay there, what does that look like?
I can help with that.
Yeah,
a little bit.
great.
So on an annual basis, again, just for the rounding numbers, we're assuming revenue is 110. Out of that 110, roughly about 60 on an annual basis would be for named projects. The remaining 50 would be for transit and other categorical projects roughly. So if you use $60 million a year, each 5-year period, you're looking at $300 million that you're able to deliver. So period 1, 2, and 3, you almost hit the total for named projects. But again,
But we're not talking just name, we're talking both, right? So it's 110 million.
110
is
is the average
annual.
total. But I want to make sure you keep in mind the categoricals and transit as well. So you have to deduct that from these projects.
One more time?
You would have to deduct that roughly $60 million a year. And there's only about 50 set aside or 60 set aside for these projects annually.
So correct me if I'm wrong, but there's roughly 30 million that has to go for transit, right? And then there's
Another
a certain
another
number
20
amount,
for
another 20
categorical.
that goes for
So there's
categorical.
60 left
So
on
there's
the
60 left that's dedicated strictly for
Correct.
So,
named projects.
so one thing that's been on at me on this, and I think this is contradictory to what we're doing today. We assume that the entirety of the program is complete in 20 years. And that's not what we've assumed in the current program. We've assumed that we're going to continue as long as we start project in the corridor, that check. We know we can deliver when we deliver, right? I'm not suggesting that we should extend the program, but given the same approach, it would seem to me that we're probably looking at projects and cost expenses that will be incurred in 21 and 22 years. And this shows that we're finished in 20. And so what that does is that takes pressure off, understanding that we have to amass dollars. You accumulate dollars. You don't get the voter approves and then the next day you have $110 million. So I think that there's an assumption here that we immediately start expending and start ultimately receiving dollars, which in this case would be debt service. So it seemed to me that the conversation as a minimum would be it's expending through 21 years. We expended $110 million a year on average, that we would expend them over 21 years. We amass in the first year, and then we start spending for 20 years. And then in that last year, we've spent the entirety of $110 million on average. So I don't know, I'm just trying to be realistic, as to how this is laid out, a suggestion we should think about.
So again, if there were any projects suggested for period 4, we would have modeled going beyond 20 years. But there are no projects in period 4, so all of them assume that they start no later than the 15th year, so we're assuming you got 5 years to finish those projects out. Had we had projects in period 4, you're correct, we would have assumed beyond the 20 years.
Okay, so go ahead, Sam.
But just a quick question, some Farhad said, you said you're projecting 110 million per year
Just ballpark.
ballpark. Last year, RTA collected 118.9 million. Why are you deflating it to 110?
Again, I'm just using a ballpark for this discussion, but yes, we're using the actual numbers that we have from Eller.
What are the actual numbers?
It ranges from 115, 119, all the way up to 120 something. We're using actual revenue projections.
I know you commented that we may not be able to reorder or rephase these today. I think we have to take a shot.
You want to do this? Go for it. You're on.
I-
Floor is yours.
I mean, if we're gonna do that, we would huddle up. I mean, we've got our transportation director here, and we can break and huddle up, right? And, you know, other representatives on the TMC have staff here. I mean, I think it's worth a shot. Because what are we gonna recommend? What are we gonna recommend to the board that they do with their Thursday meeting?
When is it reading?
It's Thursday. Other than what we've landed on is saying, okay, bring contingency up to 100 million, bring debt service up to 50 million. But we're not there. What are they gonna do then? We're gonna ask them to reorder the phasing projects.
Again, along those lines, if you can see the diagram, starting year 10, that's where you can start shifting things out. So I would recommend if you shift anything from period 3 to period 4 up to about $200 million, you can balance that out. Or if not, you can go back further into period 2. We'll take it out.
That seems to be the less.
Yeah.
Smooth it out.
And if at 50 million, you know, we get there in 24 years. If we had 70 million or 75 million, then maybe that gets us a lot closer to the 20-year mark.
I think John Bernal, you have your hand up. Thank you, Greg, for pointing that out. John, you got the floor.
Oh, can you hear me, Mike?
Yeah, you're fine. Thank you, sir.
Okay, great. Thanks. Yeah, I think we were headed that way. I think what I heard Farhad say a little while ago is that there are no projects in period 4.
Currently, the schedule.
No, yeah.
Yeah, currently the schedule we have does not show any projects recommended in period 4.
Okay. And obviously, I don't think that's realistic at all, given what we've experienced in the last RTA and what you just typically experience in project delivery. So my thought is simply, and if Carmine can get the group together to do it, I think it'd be great. You're going to have to make some tough decisions about pushing things forward. I mean, if I was a jurisdiction, I'd say absolutely, I got to have my projects in periods 1 and 2. But given what we're seeing here and how it's affecting our cash flow, I think RTA staff has to be put in the middle of this and say, okay, if you can't get it voluntarily from the sponsors, then somebody's got to be the big dog and say, sorry, it can't work that way. That's my comment.
Thank you, John. Are you offering to be the big dog? Check. Why don't we do this?
I'm retired, Mike. I'm retired.
How about this? Why don't we take a break and huddle up with whoever you need to? I'm gonna have to go. I've got to go to a press conference, so I may or may not be back. Apologize. So John, I'll turn it over to you. But see what we can do to maybe make a little progress. As soon as that's finished, if I can, I'll head back over here and we can try to work. And we'll do our part to try to look at it. My caution to you all is remember what happened in the 06 RTA. You know, the city of Tucson pushed a lot of their projects back because quite frankly, we weren't ready. Happy to do that. And now we're having a hell of a time delivering city of Tucson projects now because the money magically ran out. Nobody's fault, but it just did. And that's a challenge. So we all have to be ready for that and know that that's part of the challenge and part of the rhetoric that we're all going to have to address going forward. So with that, let's take a recess. Jen, you convene whenever you see appropriate. Okay. All right. Thank you.
10 minutes.
Now that, maybe he had their number. I don't know. First of all, it's not a good idea in the final for it. I'm gonna drive with a bit busted up.
Thank you very much. As you know, this rotates into these. We take a few minutes. Chat amongst ourselves about things we can do to move some projects forward. I want to take a moment, we can chat about that, but then I think we need to go back. There's still lots of discussion about which is the baseline plan of the project. So we're working off what we did with TMC modified or Sorito, or what that looks like. We'll come back to that in a moment. So I'd like to selfishly start by asking Carmine to begin with looking at 3 projects that Pima County's identified that we could slide back, which may be all the math we need to do on sliding projects.
Sure. Thank you, Jan. Just on the first page down, item number 14. Drexel Road, that project we've identified could shift from phase 2 to phase 3. So that's 14.2 million, moving from 2 to 3. And then top of the next page, line number 16, Irvington Road. Also okay to move that from 2 to 3. That's 21.8 million. Item number 17, Orange Grove. Moving that from 2 to 3. That's 22.6. And then item number 19, Colossal Cave Road, shifting it from 2 to 3 out to 3 to 4. That's 157. I don't know what the split was on that for the calculations, how much of that was planned in phase 2 and 3, but we can move that out to 3 and 4.
I'm sorry, the total for
157.3.
yeah, if you have flexibility on that project, there's opportunities to spread that out further and make it work.
So that's it. The other ones, you know, First Avenue, that's a deferred project. That's in period 1. Silver Bell, likewise with the town of Marana and Pima County. And then we left where they are Thornydale in period 1, as well as Valencia in period 1 and 2. So the moves are Drexel, Irvington, Orange Grove, Colossal Cave.
I really applaud the county for taking a hard look at that. I be interested to know if Tucson's in a position to do the same or to consider some. But regardless, I think there's also a bit of an exercise in, you know, these periods are 5 years, right? And so from a cash flow standpoint, starting a project in year 1 is different than starting a project in year 4 or 5, still in period 1, right? But there's a difference in terms of cash flow. And so I think there's flexibility in this plan as we go, and probably, you know, it's incumbent on all of us as a group to be sensitive to that cash flow. And, you know, can an agency start instead of starting in year 1, even though you're programmed in period 1, you know, can you start in year 3, you know, just from a cash flow perspective. So that's something that it's hard to quantify. But the reality is that we're dealing with 5-year periods, and there's cash flow flexibility in that, and still being able to claim, hey, yeah, we maintained our period 1 status or period 2 status or period 3 status, whatever it is, and work cash flow that way as well.
Thank you. So, Farhad, do you think that what we've just delineated in projects we can push out helps?
Yeah,
Does it eliminate any negative cash flow here?
definitely. If I may, or any other suggestions for delays, there we go.
Madam Chair, we identified 3 projects that we could shift. The first being Irvington Road, moving it from,
What line, Tim? Sorry.
I'm sorry, 28 of the handout, line 28, moving it from period 2 to period 3. That's a $60 million project. Line 29, Campbell modernization, we would move from period 2 to period 3. that's a $32 million project. And then Harrison Road expansion, which is line 31, we would move from period 1 to period 2. And that is a $39 million project for a total of $131 million.
Any other ones? Any other ones? So Madam Chair, back to, oh, I'm sorry, Rod.
Yes, Rod.
Thank you, Chairman. I can at least solidify line 8, which is a snoring quarter. You've got it spread out from 1 to 4. We're just now kicking off the tier 2 on that one, so we won't even know what the right of way is to purchase for at least another 4 or 5 years. So I think we can, since it is strictly right of way, we can move that one at least to tier 2 and solidify it.
So it says 1 or
Here.
4, so we were looking at 3 plus it's what, 5 million?
Yeah, it's right of way, so it's got to be up front.
So we're at the 2.
So at least it's solidified.
Yeah, that's a small amount.
Yeah, I know. I'm trying to do what I can.
We've identified, thank you, Robbie, we've identified a couple $100 million plus that can be split out and shifted out.
Yeah.
Just-
Madam Chair, again, going back to your original statement there, our target was 150 plus. I think this is more than sufficient to accommodate that, and going back to what Shane said. So even within period 3 and period 4, we have that flexibility to adjust and move some of the expenses out to balance it out. So I think that this is appreciated. And again, I want to thank you all for offering that. And going back to previous requests for us to do that, that would have been very difficult to do, but I appreciate you guys volunteering to do that.
It would have been fun to see you try.
Well, can I ask a couple of questions? Because there's a couple of red flags that jumped up on the storm corridor. You're correct, but if I remember from the workshop, the money allocated was right away, match, or comp plan updates necessary on that. And if I remember what ADOT has said before, in order for the NEPA document to be finalized, the money has to be shown and programmed in a subsequent year within that time frame. So we basically had laid it out to be upfront rather than period 4 to show continuation of efforts and activities.
I think, Rod, help me here, but we've identified, well.
Yeah, that's a small amount.
million. If we need to leave that 8.5 million in one, I think that.
Right, and I just think by locking it down, it can still be used for each one of those things, but if it's used for right away up front, it's fine.
Well, and the whole thing is putting it in period 2 could create a gap. And will that cause problems with the tier 2 EIS underway? That was my red flag.
Again, it's a small amount. If you don't mind, we'll keep it in one and just, and then we'll adjust as needed.
And that's fine.
That's fine, I'm just not sure it's realistic to even keep it in one. This is gonna be a major project. This is gonna be well above the $500 million limit. So it's gonna need a whole financial plan for implementation and everything. So it's a different animal than just a standalone, a small project.
Totally agreed. I guess, and that's flexible. Sam, I had a question for you. Harrison Road. As a 4-lane roadway with a bridge funded under RTA current, I'd envision that there would need to be those done jointly, not as 2 separate projects. So would you actually do the bridge, stop, and then start design on the 4-lane and not overlap them properly?
Yeah, there's no way that we would have to delay that delivery of that bridge for so long. That there's no way. Even if we leave Harrison Road in phase 1 or period 1, those 2 projects will probably never line up. We're moving so much faster on the bridge.
And you're okay with that?
Yeah.
2 distinct phases?
So we looked at the traffic volumes. Future volumes on Harrison are not going to be an issue for us, so we're okay with shifting that one out. Look at period 2.
Again, thank you all for that. That is really helpful.
Thank you.
Sounds awesome.
Let me just to reiterate, is that, so the
I-
question, the concerns that have been expressed about the negative cash flow, years of negative cash flow, we believe we have addressed with this
Correct.
instrument.
With the comment that was made that
Yeah.
either at 75 million or 50, but we can come back with that. So worst case scenario, we move it up a little bit to balance it. That was the comment you made previously, up to 75 million.
Sam?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Maybe RTA staff can help me understand how did the expenditures and the categoricals, more specifically, all the city's modernization projects figure into this exercise?
Thank you, Sam, for that. So again, it goes back to what I said previously. We're assuming roughly 60 million for corridor projects. another 20 million for those categorical projects throughout the 20-year plan, and then the 30 million plus for transit. So we have flexibility within each 5-year period, up to $100 million for those categoricals.
Okay, that doesn't entirely answer my question. Then how are you going to prioritize the delivery of those categorical projects by period?
Currently, there's no requirement to name those by period because they're categoricals. So they just come as they come and they go through the process. That's up to this group. If you want to prioritize those, we can do that as well. But that was not part of this exercise to prioritize categoricals.
So from a financial cash flow perspective, you're just taking that lump sum dollar amount and assuming that it's spent every single year on
Up to
categorical
$20 million annually.
without prioritizing the actual delivery of those projects.
So again, what we've looked at the financials, they make some determine again with the debt service and contingency, but there still seems to be a little bit of a floating conversation about what's the plan, right, that we're looking at. So is it TMC modified at this point or what?
Madam Chair, I think where I'm at, and I think where the town of Marana is at, is the one that makes the most sense is TMC modified. I don't think that the TMC plan is something, and that was pretty clear from the RTA board that they were not okay with that plan. So that means either going back to the CDC plan or the Tucson modified, or I mean the TMC modified, the plan that was presented by Sarita at our last meeting. With the additional contingency, if we move it up to 75, I think we're with debt service. I think we're, quite frankly, we're right there.
Madam Chair.
Shane, then Carmen.
I just want to make sure we're getting vernacular correct. There on the spreadsheet that you have here, this large one, there's a TMC modified plan that has the sweeps in it. And then there's the new modified plan, or the plan that Sarita put forward at our last meeting. There's two CAC plans.
Yes.
One is the 4.2 and one is the 5.1. And I'm suggesting that if we're talking, I think you're suggesting the 4.2 on the CAC, if we're going to go back to anything.
Correct.
But the focus is the new modified plan, or the
Sarita modified,
which is, yeah, this blue column.
in the blue column,
Yeah.
as opposed to TMC modified in the gold or the CAC adopted 4.2.
So that said, it sounds like the exercise we just went through with the amazing help from the county and the city, it gets us a cash flow positive using 50 million. The Sarita modified plan calls for 77 million in there. And so I'm just.
I want to clarify that we went back to 75 million based on the comment that Carmine made. So 75 was the
Okay,
debt service.
great. So that's basically in line with this plan then. Okay, perfect.
If I may, can we see it still with the 50 and the 75, because with these changes it may necessitate?
We can run it again, but again, as you recall, our target was to get to the 75, so that was the target, but sure, we can run both.
Remove that one. Time to go back and talk a little bit about the new modified from last time.
And Madam Chair, I'll start just so hopefully everybody's following the conversation. So on the handout that you have in your packet, 5.1 was eliminated by the board. So that's no longer being discussed. 4.2 was the remaining CAC recommended plan. And then you have the TMC modified plan, which was recommended by this body. And then you have in blue, the new modified plan, which was discussed at the last meeting. And again, based on what was just discussed earlier today, that kind of gives you that scaling flexibility that you were talking about earlier.
Right. Sorry, I thought that's what I missed. What are the comments about? Yes, sir.
Madam Chair, so I do think that we're at a place where we need to provide some sort of feedback for the idea. We need 3 days. And although this was presented, the new modified plan at the last meeting, it really wasn't thoroughly discussed. And so perhaps there's opportunity for us to discuss that more now if needed. I'm personally at a place where I've looked at it enough, talked about it with my mayor enough to know that I feel comfortable moving this forward to the RTA board. And I'm at a position to be willing to make a motion to that effect unless there's additional discussion that needs to happen before we get to that place that might move me off my position. So,
We can make a motion and then we can have the discussion with the.
okay, well then, Madam Chair, I'd like to move that we take the new modified plan, the Salrita modified plan, to make sure that we're clear, the one in the light blue, and make that as a recommendation to the RTA board. And I think the current amount for contingency in that is 77 million, and I'm comfortable leaving it at 77 or moving it to the 75. I don't know that that is.
Is that contingency or debt service?
That's a debt service.
Okay, thank you.
And I recommend that we present that to the, or that staff present that to the RTA board as a recommendation from the TMC.
I'll second that motion.
Open for discussion.
Just clarification. So again, the debt service goes to 77 out of the 110, or does it increase the 110?
In the current proposal from Sarvita, it's at 77, and I believe the motion is to keep it at 77 for, at least for discussion, yes.
Okay, so the 110 stays. Okay, the debt service of that is 77. And then
Sorry, which 110 are you talking about?
The new modified
I
element.
just wanted you adding the-
line 128. So it becomes 128.
No, that's line 128.
So does that 110 go up or does it stay? Okay, it's 77. All right. And then the contingency does stay at 40,000. Is that correct?
I believe at the last meeting, this committee recommended $100 million for contingency, so that would be the
So it
recommendation.
goes to 100 million. Okay,
Yes,
not 40,000.
correct, right.
I'm sorry, Jeff, to that, with that.
My only other, I guess it's more of a comment. That out of the 610 for transit, it really doesn't have it broken out in this particular plan. And wanted to make sure neighborhoods, circulators, as well as the special needs, which is growing, the ADA battle ride. You know, we talk about language about do no harm and allow growth, at least incorporate inflation. And if that's the best we can do today, that's fine. But I wouldn't mind if it went back to the transportation committee and had a little bit more layout of that, but anyway.
Yeah, so again, my understanding was that the recommendation builds on the CAC recommendation 4.2, and 4.2 recommendation has that additional level of detail. And the discussion was, yes, no harm to any transit services. All transit services will have opportunities for enhancement.
What we did say that we did in that. It maintained the existing routes, right?
A lot of emphasis was placed on that.
Right, yeah, that's, be real clear about that. Okay.
I had a quick clarification question. The 100 million in contingency that's not on the plan comes out of the increased revenue. Number. That's correct. Correct. Okay, so the increase in revenue takes care of contingencies. Correct. Based on revenue. Sorry, Carmine.
60 million of it, right? Because there's 40 million in the proposed plan.
I'm not seeing any.
Yeah, we can take care of that. So
There's
we'll
the
go.
overlap, which is 40 million, which is the continue, but we've got no economic
I'm sorry,
contingency.
you're
There's
correct. That's
zero.
correct. That's correct.
So it's 100 out of the 125.
It's 100 on top of the 40 million?
Yes,
Yes.
separate. The 40 is a revenue loss.
Shane's question was, is it an addition to 60?
No, that was clarified. Okay. It's, yeah.
Now we're gonna try.
Now, that's what I wanted to verify, so I understand now, 100%, right, you cannot, 100 million economic and then 40 million overlap.
For 40 million separated on top.
Okay, and I think, to the question that Jeff raised, and I just want to make sure because on transit, because Farhad, you went back in response to his question and said, the CAC recommendation was the starting point. And when we adopted the TMC modified plan, we had three principles there. It was maintain existing services. It was add the high capacity bus route, and then anything remaining would go for expansion. That's what we left off with on the TMC modified plan. And so how does that vary from what the CAC recommendation?
That's consistent with the CAC's recommendation. They added $100 million essentially for that same
So
purpose.
the dollar amount is the same as CAC,
610.
right? With the then caveat that the 610 goes to maintaining existing top priority, adding in the high capacity bus route, and then expansion would follow.
Yes, that's my understanding.
Yes, but I would add that even the 510 had expansion included in it.
And
But
I
yes,
just want to be
additional
very
100.
clear that when we're voting to approve this plan, that we all understand that's the order of priority for the transit 610. Right, is existing service, to Jeff's point,
Mhm.
high capacity bus route, and then it's service expansion.
Correct.
Okay.
Madam Chair.
Yeah, Shane, go ahead. Go ahead, Shane.
Oh, go ahead. I believe that was verbatim almost what we discussed when we adopted the previous plan. So that resonates very true with me in terms of the intent of that 610.
Yes, sir.
Yes, Madam Chair. Question is you had made a point earlier. If we find a number above the pessimistic, not at the baseline, the amount of excess money, how is that going to get allocated? Does that, I mean, do we need to be specific as to that money then being looked at from an assessment of the road elements being pushed from, 1 to 2, 2 to 3? How do you prioritize that? Is that money going to be equitably shared, or are we going to be specific as to the additional money going there?
Good. Or, I know there's been conversations in the past too about making sure that any additional funds are used for all of for categoricals as well as main projects, and how does that all lay out?
Well, I'm just saying, but at our last discussion, we said that was just a suggestion.
Right.
From the CAC, but that is not something that, the board has to react to. Does this body need to make a recommendation to say, here's where we're going with the excess money?
So Madam Chair, my understanding of Sarita's recommendation is that you actually go ahead and program the excess funding based on what's in this sheet.
That's correct. And I think that was the point that I was gonna make. I don't know if Shane was gonna make the same point, but I think based on the plan as it was presented by Salarita at the last meeting, if the projections come in higher than anticipated, those monies would go to fund the project from the city of Tucson based on the prioritization of those projects by the city.
So I'll just underscore that, Madam Chair, if I could. We were at a bit of a crossroads. The city of Tucson clearly was stating, at least as I understood it, that there are a number of projects that the plan wasn't able to help them with. And so the whole intent and idea of this proposal was to make all the agencies whole in terms of what we had talked about and presented and worked through over the last couple of years. And then to recognize that if these numbers and the city of Tucson has come out very strong, that they believe these numbers are an undershoot of what we're going to realize. We wanted this plan to say, okay, make everybody whole, and if we do see a brighter sky, then those dollars, get fed over to support the other projects that didn't make the daylight in the plan.
Just, I understand the concept.
Yeah.
In practice, how does that work? Is it at is it at the end of each period that gets trued up? Is it annually dollars in excess of what the projection are? Is it at the tail end of the program? If it's the last one, right, there may not be enough time remaining in the program to deliver then that level of projects.
I appreciate the question. We didn't dive that far down. In concept, I think there's flexibility to iron that policy out as the group wants.
If I may just add to that, if you recall, there's the 5-year required review. So that document could assist in that conversation. So every 5 years you can review and see where you are at.
For me, if it was the county projects, I'd be a little bit nervous about not having that detail worked out.
And Sam, can I ask you about how this deals with the transit piece? Does it meet the city of Tucson's needs with the priorities we've suggested and identified in the 610?
610 does, if that specificity is included in the plan. As of right now, all we're seeing is a lump sum.
Right.
And I'm really concerned that I've never seen where what Carmine suggested be broken out, that we see a dollar amount for existing, a dollar amount for our BRT project, and the remaining dollar amount for expansion. And I also want to point out that in the calculations on the 3rd page here, it attributes the entire 610 to the city of Tucson, which is inaccurate. That should be revised accordingly.
Thank you, Sam. But then I'm going to assume that when we get the breakdown, it matches with the policy criteria that we've established, right? Which is maintaining current and high speed new transit and new lands. We could get a full breakout of how that works down, but that's to the city. So, Mike, that's where we are. We're looking at what's it. We came back following our huddle and ended up between the city of Tucson and Pima County with over $200 million in projects. We can move back and smooth out just a few years. We dealt with concerns regarding negative cash flow. And then went back and said, all right, we've looked at the financial buckets, but now we got to figure out what the plan is. And so we're looking at the modified plan from last time. We have not moved forward, and one of the questions come up is what we said was, we know where the 125 is going. Any additional funds is a delta that can go to other projects. As we pointed out, we really did not delineate or specify how those, how we would go through those.
So I apologize. I will just tell you, our thoughts and condolences go out to one of our officers' families that succumbed to his injuries yesterday. He was in a vehicle accident and died after that. And it's very hard on the entire department, entire city team, and entire community. And so thank you for your patience as I had to attend the press conference on that. So our deepest condolences go to all the family as well as the TPD family, as well as the city family. So thank you for your patience. So there is a motion on the floor. I think there was a second.
We're just getting feedback and having a conversation about what else needs to get moved or adjusted from that. I see Sam's coming up.
Sound good.
Thanks, Mike, Mr. Chair. So I just had some questions. Remind me, Shane, does this new modified plan include the use of regional dollars, the 75 million regional dollars?
It does not. Is that the sweeps?
Yes,
Yeah, no, it does not.
on page 2, I think.
Okay. Second question is then explain to me the scaling strategy here in terms of how it affects the city of Tucson. Are you assuming that all of our modernization projects are kind of like in this holding area, and if there's additional dollars, we can get to those projects? And if we're not, we don't get to those projects? Is that what you're suggesting in this plan?
Yes.
And then lastly, I just want to point out too that on this table on page 3, you have the deferred projects included in the COT portion. And I thought we talked about deferred projects are right off the top. We've always kind of kept those separate from these calculations, and I know that that was figured into the city's portion, city percentage, along with the 610 that I mentioned previously. So I think those numbers are skewed a little bit, and that 50 plus% is probably not exactly accurate. So I think I have some concern with supporting this motion because it doesn't really give the clarity to the city voters that we were looking for in this plan, because it's all based on this premise that there may be additional revenue, and I'm concerned that the analysis that was just done that didn't pan out, that there is additional revenue. It's only 125 million, and 100 of that is going to contingency. So really, there's only 25 million remaining in the plan for additional projects, and that just doesn't get us to where we need to be. That's my comments. Thank you.
Your comments, Jeff?
What do we need to do to end the projects?
I mean, I think that's where the city was at when we approved the TMC modified plan, is that those projects were named and in the plan, showing that the city of Tucson voters are getting that return on investment out of the plan. You know, this body, I think Carmine mentioned, this body approved that TMC modified plan with a near unanimous vote. And so I would still be in support of the modified plan, which included the 75 million of regional dollars.
Mr. Chair, in kind of response to Sam's comments there, I think the problem with the TMC modified, whether it was voted on nearly unanimously or not, is the RTA board kicked it back and said we're not okay with that. So the new modified plan kind of takes into account what the city has talked about now, most recently over the past month or so, that there's an anticipation that those monies would come in much higher, regardless of what. I mean, I know you guys had Eller take a look at that and came out with a projection of 1.6 just within the city of Tucson. So I think this plan takes into account that if the city feels confident that that's accurate and those monies come in, then there's opportunity when those monies come in to be able to fund the projects that the city wants to have funded in whatever order you want to have them funded in. And I think to Carmine's point, I think it's an excellent point. We have to kind of delineate what that looks like. Is that trued up at the end of each 5-year period? Is it trued up at the end of each year? I'm not sure. And I think that certainly makes sense to have something solidified when we present that to the RTA board. But I think this gets everything, makes everybody whole, as Shane was talking about, for the projects that we've been talking about for the past 2 years, and gives opportunity for much more if those monies come in. As you know, the city has already indicated they believe it's going to.
Madam Chair, or Mr. Chair, sorry.
Thank you.
I just, from a context standpoint, you know, we saw the memo that that Mike put out from his office to the city council early in February. It talked about, and I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but it talked about the city feeling as though the outcome of a tax was going to be far greater than what we were talking about here with our pessimistic numbers. And so the intent or the idea behind this proposal was to help us to move forward as a region, acknowledging that if in fact we actually see a more optimistic outcome as opposed to the pessimistic outcome, that we are making a policy decision as a region that those monies are already earmarked for the city of Tucson, allowing the rest of the projects that we've talked about over the last couple of years and prioritized and sweated and wrestled with, allowing those to remain whole. Because quite frankly, the rest of I know from my council, my mayor, we're not terribly confident that those numbers are gonna hit the optimistic scenario. And so we're quite content operating under the pessimistic model. And this proposal was an attempt to help us get off center and recognize that if those numbers are better, and we all hope that they are, that goes, all 100% of it goes to the city of Tucson to get your additional projects done.
So I appreciate, I'm sorry. You guys want to wrestle?
Go ahead. I just want to come back to a point that Terry made in his comment, and he said that something to the effect that the RTA board rejected the TMC modified plan, and I didn't get that out of the conversation. They had a lot of discussion about really three key areas, in my opinion. It was how much contingency, it was debt service, and then it's what to do with the categoricals and whether to use regional funds to go ahead and support that. So of those three areas, we've addressed the contingency at the levels that everybody seemingly is comfortable with. We've moved debt service up to the levels where most all of us are comfortable with, and the board has favored a lower amount. So to me, that leaves the discussion about what to do with the safety and active transportation element. And do we use regional funds to help support that? And do we name projects? So included in that bundle are a number of county projects as well. So those get removed and put into the, hey, if there's more revenue, we'll go ahead and.
I don't think that's correct, Carmine. I believe that the new modified plan.
Oh, you're right. I'm sorry.
Bundle, and we would just go through the normal tip process to submit for those projects as a region.
Mr. Chair, I just think we're moving ahead with this recommendation based on a given that the Eller updated revenue forecast at the pessimistic level is where we're going to be at. In any other case, I think we need some type of simplified second opinion. We did it previously, is to have someone look at the audit. We had previously, if I recall, maybe Jim Rhodes.
Right.
Jim Rounds did it before, but it wasn't very comprehensive. He looked at the audit and said, yeah, I think it's in the ballpark. Does it make sense to have some other entity just review the new forecast to see if it's the same assumption?
On that note, again, I believe
You have a comment? I'm sorry.
the proposal that's being discussed is trying to address that by saying, if we come up with another 200 million on top of that, what are we going to do with it?
So,
I'm sorry, can I come back? So as I'm looking at the new modified plan, all of the named safety and active transportation projects came out, not just the cities, all of them. So that's the point that I was making, and Shane,
They came out as named projects, but there's a bucket like what we've done historically, right? We go and we submit for a project when we're ready, and we have a bucket of money to react and respond as a region over that period of 20 years. And so that was the idea behind this plan. There wouldn't be any named projects in there. There would be whatever the process historically has been to submit and get your project moving forward.
So how does that differ from the city projects that are removed from being named, and then they're in this other suspended category of if there's more revenue generated, right? I don't see the difference really between that, because are they to not submit for the annual safety and active transportation dollars for those projects while they're waiting, or we're all waiting to see if the revenue is above the estimate? I think it's a really important point. If we're going to go with this structure of the plan, I think that needs to be very specifically defined.
so, I was gonna go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I thought that there is a specific amount in a bucket for those items still, correct? And what is that? What are those amounts for safety?
For the green column, there's what we were discussing, that would be consistent with what you have in the blue column of the thing, but uh, categories, safety. There we go. Well, if you don't mind, second page, so for example, under transit, you have 610, both in the blue column as well as the green column.
Okay, there, I see it.
Yeah, matching in most cases, I believe.
So those categories still exist.
Yeah.
And people are still able to submit projects in those categories. Anybody can. But then money's above those amounts, right? This is assuming the amount of what is it? 2.4, no,
146.
2.46 billion. So those are the amounts in those categories that anybody can put in for. But what we're talking about is money above $2.46 billion. That when those monies come in, those monies are set aside specifically for the city of Tucson projects.
We're not gonna know that until the end, right? If that's the threshold, 2.46, how do we know until we get to the very end?
Well, that's what I said earlier, I mean, that was exactly my point earlier. Are we truing that up on every year, every 5 years? How do we true it up?
So you just where it's going.
Hang on a second, Farhad. I had a comment. I was going to talk after Terry. I really appreciate, I think where we're starting to go, and I think there's value there, and I do think that there's an opportunity. Here is the fundamental concern that I have, and you're kind of bouncing around it a little bit, and I'm going to just get right to it. As I outlined for you months ago now, maybe even longer, in order for me to get support, both from the mayor and council and from the voter, I'm going to have to show return on investment. Okay. And you may have something different. I don't know, but I do know that I'm going to have to demonstrate that. The reason that I put in my proposal a bit ago, specificity in the categoricals, was to be able to do exactly that. Because if you remember, and you do the math, just from a pure percentage standpoint, the roadway corridor elements that are allocated to the city of Tucson are very small. Okay. And that was based on the vote or the consensus, I don't know if that's even the right word, where modernization was way down on the list. Remember that? We went through that exercise. I said, fine. Then I took the named projects that I would have had modernization for in the roadway element, and I put them into the categoricals. And I outlined it. And I listened. And that then I was able to show, look, here is the return on investment because I've got specificity. I understand that causes consternation and concern, in terms of using those buckets. But if we just go back to everybody can apply, that's a problem for us. I'm just telling you it is. And I'm going to have to have some specificity. Now, if you want to give the city of Tucson a bucket of safety element projects, fine. You allocate it to the city of Tucson, fine. We can have that discussion. But specificity is more important to me than the pot of money going to the city of Tucson. It has to be defined for me to be able to go out there and demonstrate that. That's the first thing. The second thing is, I think if we're truly going down a path where additional revenue is allocated to the city of Tucson, I'm fine with that, and that's great. I appreciate that. But I still have concerns about the basis for the plan, because that assumes certain things. Like, I think we should have a conversation about debt service, have a conversation about contingency, going back to the Carmine outline, have a conversation about all those so that we know that is the plan and it's solid. It's solid on the, we'll call it the base. And then we'll roll the dice down the road on future revenues. The last thing I'll leave you with is I don't think anyone is arguing that we shouldn't use the pessimistic. At least I'm not arguing we shouldn't use the pessimistic. I think we're all good managers, and I think we understand that can work. The reality, though, is when in our information, it's only got a probability of happening 20 to 25%. I'll take those odds all day long, that it's going to be more than that. And so I'm starting to think of it, okay, what happens in the baseline? What happens with the additional dollars? But again, I'm thinking about it both in terms of support from the council as well as the voter to have specificity as much as we possibly can without tying our hands down the road. And Terry, to your point, in terms of truing up, I think we're going to have to do it fairly early, because otherwise we won't know until year 18 or 19 if we just play that scenario out.
And that doesn't work.
Well, I don't know.
I don't think waiting that long would work.
That's what I mean. Yeah, that won't work. And so we have to think about that, and maybe we do a true up every couple of years, or maybe 5 years at the most, something like that. But we're going to have to do something different than just waiting until the end, even though, in a perfect world, that'll get us exactly, 100% knowledge.
So completely understand your points. I think well made. So if in the categoricals, there was a percentage, and I don't know what the percentage is of the categoricals that went to the city of Tucson over the RTA, over the current RTA. I think it's in the neighborhood of 70% roughly.
I've heard that. I've never confirmed that, but I've heard
Yeah.
that number thrown out.
Do we know, does staff have that number? So if there was a number that we can come up with that we set aside in the categorical specifically for the city of Tucson, right? So that you guys know, and you have projects and you can name those projects, you can list them as these are the types of projects or the exact projects that would come out of our portion, the city's portion of the categoricals. And then there's some that the rest of the jurisdictions could submit for, right? And then if there's monies that come in above and beyond what we anticipate, so if it's 25% is the pessimistic, maybe there's a good shot we get a higher percentage and that money comes in, and those monies are set aside as TMC modified. I'm going to call it the Saurita plan, because I keep getting confused here. The Saurita plan, those monies then would go toward the city of Tucson remaining projects that are not identified.
So I would say yes, and I'm fine, at least on my end and from a city of Tucson perspective, identifying the projects that would be in those buckets, leaving some flexibility. So that there's a list of projects, as many as we can, with an amount to be used in the future for unforeseen situations or unforeseen projects. On top of that, could then be a list of projects or project types that we would assign down the road. Again, to give specificity to the voters, so that when we're there and we're asking them, we're saying, hey, we want you to trust us. And if we get more money, then here's the way it will be used. Even again, if they're just, I'll use the term categories, but types of projects going forward, I think that could work.
There's not anything named for the county anymore, and I think it would be helpful for us to be able to at least name some, whether it's in election material, whatever. This is the only place we have anything for Green Valley. And I think it's going to be very important that we have that highlighted, called out in some. So whether it's just, whether it helps to name some of them or not, I think we've got the funds identified. We have a process to make sure that that the city's projects are in there and that they get the additional funding. Yeah, so they have assurances that the appropriate amount of money inures to the benefit of the city. And then look at how we wish to deal with naming or not, or is it campaign literature or not, to make sure that all of our jurisdictions are looking.
So if I was going to go back and respond to Terry's question from before. So the 5-year review that's conducted, it looks at obviously what happened the previous 5 years and what's planned for the next 5 years. So that report is very comprehensive. And it would look at percentages of the categoricals that have been completed, dollar amounts. So if there's any excess revenue, we can easily identify that every 5 years and say, for example, within the last 5 years, there's $25 million excess revenue. And program that 25 million for the following 5 years.
Thank you, Farhad. Going back to, just a second, Sam, going back to Bob's point about the second opinion. I'm not opposed to that. I think that could be a value. Any thoughts on that?
Can you say that again?
Bob, go ahead, Bob.
Yeah. Sure, yeah, I had mentioned that, we're going forward with the Eller forecast as a given. But are we, is it beneficial to have a second opinion, have a, group as Jim Brown's again, or someone of that entity, take a look at their updated forecast, look at the assumptions and provide a second opinion. Not full comprehensive second opinion, but something that you get comfortable.
Mr. Chair.
Oh, go ahead.
I personally don't know that where the benefit is in that. And I say that because apparently we did that last time and they came back and said, yeah, that's roughly about right. Right. So do we really anticipate that Eller, after having done this now several times for us, has gotten it so wrong that a third party is going to come in, or a second party, I guess, is going to come in and say, no, they got it completely wrong? I mean, to me, it just seems like we're spending more time that we don't really have.
I was thinking more time, but also I had heard that maybe ADOT had offered to do this for no compensation.
ADOT will do it for free? That's impressive.
You got food out there. Out there on the street.
Here's my gut, Bob. I think, I'm not opposed to a second opinion or second review. I think if we come up with a game plan for what happens if additional dollars come in, we should probably come up with a game plan if they don't come in too, on the other side. So if we're short, what does that look like? But I think if we've got a game plan that is, at least approved by the group and the RTA board, I'm not sure a second opinion would be necessary. I think if we were so married to that number and we had no kind of what happens if conversation going, then I'd be a little more, I think, hey, we should really look at that. I want to make one other point. So Shane, you're and Sam honed in on it. The 75 million is out of the Sarita plan. 75 million of regional funding.
It's not in there.
Yeah, so you didn't show it as a revenue source. Just out of curiosity, and I haven't looked at the detail for a bit, where did that money come from then? Something had to give, because that was a revenue source that when the county had put that on the table, what projects came off that equated to 75 million? I'm just curious about that, because I think that's an important nuance, if you will, of not having that in there. And so what does that look like?
So I believe, based on what you have here, that's assumed in the additional $290 million of revenue. So 75 is part of that 200 excess revenue.
I think some of it's listed in here also as where the county agreed to changes, the city agreed to changes.
But again, I think that there's a subtraction of the 75 million and that's included in the 290 as excess revenue.
That's right. So what's happening is on the TMC modified plan, when you look at the sub element total of 240. On page 2, so the TMC modified plan, row 102, the 249, if we add in the 75, right, we deducted 75 million, that was the regional fund. So that's more like 325 million that goes into that category. And that has been reduced down to 245. This 249 million is all of the listed items and the dollar amounts, subtracting 75 million of regional funds to go towards it.
So the number, the 245 number then in Shane's, so with this proposal, must not include all of those projects.
It does not.
That's not.
And then it also removes on page one, there's also, Irvington Road Modernization, line 27, 60 million that comes off there.
Refresh my memory, is Irvington and Sarita? I don't remember that for sure. Just check. Oh, okay. Just make sure we're talking about the same Irvington. So that's that 60 million?
That's 60 million right there. Okay.
Where is the modified plan with regard to debt service? That's still at the 37 million?
77.
No,
Conversation, I feel we amended it.
that's a question. That's my question. Where are we with that today? Right now, where are we with that?
77.
77 million?
Will balance it with the changes.
So 77 million is
Yes.
on Shane's proposal, your proposal?
Yeah, we keep the balance at the element total of 110.
It goes to 77 million for debt service. Is that your proposal?
Yeah, we basically just, we carried over the CAC adopted 4.2.
And contingency is still at 40?
Yes.
No.
That's overlap contingency.
Yeah, that's overlap. I'm sorry. Yeah, overlap is still 40. What is the contingency for economic or inflationary?
And it comes from the increase.
Okay, but here though,
That's what we just discussed before you came in.
okay, I'm just asking.
So, yeah,
Write it
no.
down. And then the 610 is total paying for transit.
With the priorities that have been discussed.
And then the 245 is, oh, the environmental is 50. And then the 245.
245 is the
That's safety,
safety,
right?
active transportation.
Other thoughts or comments?
Mike,
Sam?
just maybe a little, alternate approach here. So we were really close on the TMC modified plan. I do realize it includes the use of regional dollars, to make the active transportation bucket whole. Just a reminder, that was 5 million per year for 15 years. It's roughly 11% of the total allocation for the region. And there are regional projects included in there, named projects, including in Sahuarita, Oro Valley, and Pima County. But I still think it preserves regional turf for the use across the region. I think the biggest issue with this modified plan, at least from what I heard from the RTA board, was the concern about debt service and the concern about contingency. With these revised numbers, if we were to add $100 million back into that plan for economic contingency, take the remaining 25 and add it to debt service, and there's still a $9.8 million surplus at the bottom line, add that to debt service, we are really close to having the full 77 million for debt service. We have a full $100 million for economic contingency. And then everybody pretty much gets a little bit of everything they want. And the only outstanding item is making sure that the transit element has the specificity of existing dollars, BRT dollars, and expansion dollars. And I think that's about the closest we're going to get at this stage with all of these moving parts. And so that's just the thought that I had as I was doing the math here. I'm still not in support of the modified plan. I think we were close, the new modified plan by Sahuarita, I think we were closer with the TNC modified plan.
So just want to clarify, 75 million, you were saying you're reducing that.
No, leaving that,
Okay.
leaving that alone. And I think, I mean, I realize there's a bone of contention there with the use of those regional funds. But that does get us a lot closer. And I think that those regional funds are being used for some of those same projects we would otherwise be using them for, which is these categorical projects across the region.
Thank you, Senator.
So my recollection is a little bit different than Sam's on that in terms of the RTA board concern. It wasn't just about contingency and bond capacity. It was also sweeping funds and about listing basically taking up all the categoricals with named projects. So I think those were two other things that they really pushed back on, or at least a number of the board members did.
Miranda had any named projects in there, did you?
We did not.
Yeah, so Terry, I don't disagree with you. I think the point is that, again, we're trying to get too much done and we don't have enough money, right? And so where do we get the dollars? But, I'm just kind of thinking out loud here for a minute. The way, as I recall, the proposal that was put forth by the county on the 75 million was 5 million a year for the last 15 years of the program. And one way of thinking about that is if we looked at the RTA revenues in those years, and if they exceed a certain amount, that we put dollars back in or don't need the dollars from the regional funds. Could be an opportunity there. Think about it balances the program, but it gives us a potential source to replenish those funds in those out years. Might want to think about that. And I think that's reasonable. I mean, I'm fine with the 75 million, with the 5 million. That's about 11%, I think, of the revenue we get into the region for those years. I understand the concern over it, but I'm just kind of thinking that out loud, that might make sense in the spirit of what we're trying to do here. And so it's something that's looked at in those years 6 through 20. For those last 15 years, we just look and see and make the call that year. Do we need to, feed, if you will, the RTA bucket, or do we take advantage of potential increases in revenue or not? And if it doesn't, then we use those monies. Just a thought here.
Yeah, and I appreciate the thought. My only concern still is that we're sweeping them up front. We've already had to use those monies. We've already swept those monies into the RTA at the end to make ourselves whole, right? So doing it up front puts us in the position of not only doing it from years 5 through 20, but also potentially then being in a position where we'll have to take even more if we don't meet those numbers. So it doesn't allow us a great safety net, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah, but it's 11% of the region's funds in those years. I understand. I'll do what you do. That's a great point, but I don't know. So let me ask this, maybe to kick it a little further down. Assuming that the framework that we were talking about has all of those buckets filled the way we've talked about, is there a cap on how much money the city of Tucson would receive, assuming that the pessimistic forecasts are exceeded?
Is there a cap?
So if it comes in at the optimistic level, you're all okay with the city of Tucson getting whatever that delta is in the excess revenue. Is that what I'm understanding you to say?
Yes.
That's what was put on the table anyway for consideration. I recognize that there's some policy things that we need to talk about as a region, particularly pertaining to that safety, bucket. But those are policy discussions. Principally, the idea is that we would have that bucket of money there as a region to address our flexibility needs over the next 20 years. And we need to iron that policy out. But the idea is that anything in excess of that, what, 250 million, whatever that number is, would be earmarked for the city of Tucson.
And that's all categories, is that correct? And so the fundamental dollars that have been taken out of the TMC modified into the Sarita plan are the Irvington Road project. What other projects specifically? And
Looks like line 21. For that South Tucson, that's explained. Yeah. I think that's the only one in the corridor project, Mike.
I think the county, there's a county one in line 17 that goes from 61 to 45, right?
That was the rate
Again.
grant adjustments, yeah.
Based upon feedback from previous meetings.
so for these purposes, the average annual revenue calculation is 110 million. Is that correct, Farhad, total?
Using that as a ballpark, but it will exceed that also.
So I just want to confirm that. On average, we're talking about 110 million is what you're using for planning purposes for the revenue on this piece of paper. Is that right?
Correct. And confident on what
Right. So that last comment you made, constant dollars.
deflating it back.
I understand. I'm clear on what that means in terms of deflation, but what does that mean going forward in terms of the target on an annual basis? I want to know what the target is going to be. That's what I want to know. So somebody tell me or explain to me what the target is on an annual basis, that I can have some assurance that we're exceeding or not. How do we figure that out? So it's not going to be 110 million.
120 on annual basis using the 2.46.
The 2.46 is still discounted into $23.
So, yeah, again, for all purposes, we're gonna bring it back to constant dollars, 120 average annually, gets you to 2.4.
So on an annual basis in year 15 through 20, if we exceed 123 million in revenue, the city of Tucson will get the difference. Is that
I
correct?
believe that's the proposal.
I'm asking you if that's what your understanding is.
That's my understanding of the proposal, yes.
And the intent was to try to make the effort that we had put in the last 2 years whole and recognize that if there's excess to that goes to the city of Tucson.
Going back to the point that Sam made about that 610, if that is allocated to the city of Tucson for transit, that's fine, but then the city of Tucson determines how that's to be used. And that's potentially a problem, because I know that Jeff, last time, had some concerns with
It
it.
shouldn't be just to the city.
Yeah, I think we discussed that. It was resolved.
We were discussing it when I got here, and I didn't hear Sam's question answered, because Sam had asked.
Same that Stevens asked that we've answered. It maintains the current services. Has the city's project and then
And the
getting new
expansion.
stuff.
Mike, I think the clarification is just for the sake of the calculation here, and this calculation is not valid in terms of city pennies on the spreadsheet. That needs to be. But it seemed like everyone's understanding of the transit.
You were questioning the percentage stated on here.
Yeah, because
Allocated to
you-
the city of Tucson. Yeah, I guess. Yeah, gotcha. Correct.
So one thing that I'd like to at least understand your feelings on, I don't know if feelings is the right word, is if the city of Tucson gets that excess revenue, can we designate it for pavement rehabilitation of the capital projects?
According to the statute, it has to be spent on the elements of the plan as approved by the voters.
Then I would say we need to include an element, even if it's a very small element in that, just as a placeholder so that we would have latitude to do that, if in fact that's the reading. And I would want to be able to have the flexibility to do that. It doesn't have to be much and we can take it out of a city project for now, but I do think that a placeholder that gives us the opportunity to point to it and say, we're going to put dollars in that going forward.
Is the vice chair packing up?
Sad enough.
Pretty much.
Yeah, actually, I think several people mentioned that have a hard stop. So
What are you thinking on that?
again, as long as it's a element of the plan in the plan with the amount, then the board has the authority to exceed that amount over the life of the plan.
Thank you. What do you all think the rest of the? Go ahead.
Yeah, I'll just bring up,
And then,
just a question, could there be language in a ballot explanation that provides that caveat instead of an actual line item?
one more time?
Could there be, it's a legal question, whether you can have ballot language that covers
That
this
flexibility.
particular item?
If I may take a stab
You
at
may.
that. Again, the roadway projects as identified have modernization in there. So yes, potentially we can say any excess funds above and beyond could be used for modernization.
Are you equating modernization to pavement rehabilitation with capital investment?
That's what I was, back to that suggestion. I think there is a way to demonstrate that modernization can be an element of the roadway improvements.
The modernization, I just want to be absolutely clear. Because if I'm going to go back to my folks and say, we're in, this is where we're going, I want to know exactly.
Yeah.
I know in certain terms, is pavement rehabilitation for capital expense, like we've talked before, I threw out on the table, is that considered part of the modernization line items and projects?
I believe so. Yes.
So the answer is yes. And so in this particular instance, do we need a separate line item that is within the roadway corridor element or safety or any of the others that specifically outlines modernization projects? And whether we include the language on capital maintenance or rehabilitation, how do we do that so that we are crystal clear that excess revenue can go towards paving rehabilitation?
Again, if we're gonna define a bucket for excess revenue, then it goes back to what Bob said. Just describe what the excess revenues are gonna be used for, and you add capital maintenance to that description.
I'd like to see that as well before Thursday. All right. Any other comments? Well, you all are really getting antsy. I can just feel it.
What? Mike, the city received a favorable ruling from the Attorney General's office on August. What,
It's actually July.
I'm sorry, July. How does all that play into what you're thinking right now in terms of this plan? Excuse me.
Well, if I tell you, then you know everything. All of my secrets.
That's the point.
No, and I'll give you a little bit of a level of comfort on that. The council has not determined what the ask of the voter is. We have a lot of needs. Transportation is one, but that's not the only need. We have many, many other needs. And the council has still not determined that. And just to refresh your memory, the council did call that And part of it was to challenge the court to say, hey, can we do this based on our reading? We think we can. We now know we can. So there's a lot of activity going on as to what that can look like. And I wouldn't necessarily assume that it will affect any of what we're doing here in July.
You could effectively use that tool to augment what you feel you're not getting in this plan to a certain extent. Is that correct?
I could, but just to be straight up with you all, until we know what we're doing, and we know how we fit into that, it's probably premature to message anything out there, to be realistic. So this conversation is extremely important to where we might be headed. But at this point, that's not something that we're really looking at real hard in terms of what happens if this gets approved or not. I can't tell you with absolute certainty. So thank you for the question. That's not a bad question. It's reasonable.
So Mike, there's a motion and a second on the floor right now. There's a lot of discussion. I think there's still a lot of unanswered questions.
Okay.
I don't know that I feel comfortable voting for that motion based on all the things we talked about and all these balls up in the air.
Okay.
So I just wanted to have a quick conversation before we wrap about where things stand.
What does the motion state exactly? You have a.
Barry, I can restate it back if you would like. Make sure I get this right. Motion is to take the town of Sahuarita modified plan and make the recommendation that that's the plan to the RTA board. The makeup of it includes debt service at a $77 million allocation as currently identified. The contingency would be $100 million coming from the overall increase in the projected growth in the revenue. That's 100 million and then 77 on there. The transit allocation would be 610 million, still following the hierarchy laid out of maintain existing service. High capacity transit at 70, expansion to be determined. To Sam's point, the one item that was discussion but didn't get landed on was the allocation, whether it be a percentage base, a cap based to the categoricals. That didn't get really finalized, but that was the gist of the motion. Terry, did I sum that up correctly?
Yes.
So then I would ask for a modification of that or addition. I'm fine with a motion with a couple of adds.
Okay.
One, that excess revenue above the 2.46 billion would be allocated to the city of Tucson to be used as determined by the city of Tucson mayor and council. And I think that's important. And that included in that would be language that would allow the city of Tucson to utilize some of that excess revenue for pavement rehabilitation going forward.
I am comfortable with accepting those modifications.
And as the person that seconded it, I'll second those amendments.
And I gotta make sure I was writing correctly, that the allocation would go to the city and the expenditure would be decided by the city? Is that?
Within the, and I will qualify that as determined by the mayor and council, but within the framework of the ballot language, obviously, it has to be within the framework of the ballot language, which I will just say, I would really like to see that, but I do have some faith that we can figure out the language in order for us to move this thing forward. Sam, was there anything else that?
Yeah, I guess I still have concern about us agreeing to cut the Irvington project out of that list. And as I understand the way the motion sits right now, the entire active safety and active modes element is going to be a bucket. There would be no named projects in there. And it doesn't appear that we resolved how that bucket is allocated across the region. So I still have concern with that, despite some of those modifications that were made.
I would share those concerns. Thank you, Sam. So the concern is the elimination or removal of the Irvington project and the lack of specificity on the safety and active. Is that right, Sam?
Right.
Concern on that? Thoughts or comments?
Mr. Chair,
Terry and then Bob.
I'm sorry.
That's a Terry and then
Oh,
Bob.
okay. I guess, Sam, what would make you more comfortable with that element of it?
Well, the TMC modified plan is where we were at. We were most comfortable. I think we've gotten, but we have to have that specificity to show our voters and show our mayor and council that there is that return on investment. That's why it was so important that all those projects were listed. If you were to take a cleaned up version of what your motion was, you're gonna see a plan that has 6 City of Tucson projects, a BRT project, some transit, and that's it. And then just this kind of hope and a dream that we're gonna get a lot of our projects completed with that safety and active modes bucket. Again, without any specificity around how those dollars are gonna be broken up and spread out over the life of the 20-year plan. So that's my biggest concern, is that's what that plan's gonna look like. And I just don't know that, I feel like we're going backwards in time here.
Gary, I would agree, and I think that was part of the conversation of the specificity in those categorical elements allocated to this. Go ahead, Terry.
Yeah, so Sam and Mr. Chair, thank you. But I agree with you, and I think that was part of the conversation at one point today, was identifying some of those things for the city of Tucson to put in the category. I know that that's not something that some of the RTA board feels comfortable with, but I personally, if that helps us advance this and get it across the finish line, I would be comfortable not taking 100% of all of that. And I know the county, I think, feels that there is potentially a project or two that would help, appeal to certain segments of county voters. So I'm not opposed to identifying what that, some of those projects might be in the categoricals, but I think to take what we've done in TMC modified is we've taken up all the money in the categoricals with everybody's potential projects. And I think that puts us in a really bad position 10 years down the road, 15 years down the road, 20 years down the road without any flexibility. And we tie ourselves into projects that quite frankly change over time, and they have changed over time. And we're finding ourselves in that situation right now because of that. So I just think some flexibility in there, an opportunity to certainly accomplish, Sam, what you're talking about, which I fully 100% understand and can appreciate and support, but to take all of it up, that's something I think puts us in a bad position.
So I appreciate that, Terry. I think, as I said before, and I said again today, because as Sam pointed out, there's only a few projects in the roadway border elements. The city of Tucson needs to see more specificity on the other category.
I'm okay with it.
Kind of simple. Well,
I'm okay with
I
it.
mean, if you want to move the city of Tucson's over to the new modified, the Sarita plan, then that accomplishes our end. But, then are we telling everybody else, not yours? I'm talking about moving them over to the.
I'm comfortable saying not ours because we don't have any in
You don't have
it.
any, but it's South Tucson comfortable because they've got some. Actually.
Well, I think South Tucson's is already accounted for in the plan.
Not sure about that.
Yeah, we moved.
They had a budget.
It was 35 million.
35 million there.
Okay. No, I don't see that over here.
Yeah, I found that.
It's in here.
It's there somewhere. Let me see.
It's all in the
Oh, there it is.
categoricals.
Second page.
I didn't see. That's fine. As long as they're comfortable, it's good. Go ahead.
Oh, yeah.
Well, Mr. Chair, is there a way to articulate what Terry's saying in the language to define the fact that there is a condition that says an explanation to the voters that, over a 20-year period, the relevancy of these particular projects may change. And the need for safety and other improvement for those particular safety elements may change. Categories. If you put it in the language, would that be good enough to give you the flexibility of being able to shift this? You still listen, but you have an out.
I need to know with some certainty. I need to know with some certainty what the. whether it's a bucket or it's listed projects, is not as important for this conversation right now. We will define them for our mayor and council and for the voter on our end, just so that we can be open about where that investment is going to occur. But I can't do that if it's just a big pot of money and then it's like, trust us, we'll come back down the road. But that's going to be really hard for me to articulate to the voter. That's all I'm saying about that.
Mr. Chair, so the South Tucson 35 million on page 2 is a note off to the side at the bottom of the newly modified, they saw a read a modified plan. It says 35 million of this element will be allocated to South Tucson. So that's 35 million of the 245. So then that brings the 245 down to 210. And I just think if there's going to be a naming of projects in there at some level, I think we need to think through the calculus there, right? So you had made a suggestion to say that everything over the 2.46 billion, right, would be allocated to the city. Quite honestly, I don't know the full implications of that over 20 years, right? And it sounds like that could be greater, it could not be, right? I mean, depending on which side you're on and what the circumstances end up being. But then if we're talking about naming a category, so how do we reconcile that there could potentially be certain City of Tucson named projects in the safety and active transportation element? And then in the plan, there's a commitment that anything over the 2.46 would get allocated to the city, or then on an annual basis, when there's the notice of funding opportunity available for the regional funds that get used for these types of projects, are you also then going to be competing with the other jurisdictions in the region for that pot of money as well?
That's a great question.
There's so many unknown pieces here that I feel voting on a framework, I think we've done good work, right? In that come Thursday, the RTA board could be advised that the TMC recommends 100 million go to contingency, that 77 million go to debt service. And this is an open question that maybe we need to come back to. I mean, we're trying to get to a vote here today, and just quite honestly, I don't know the global implications of what we would be approving as an approach here, and that makes me super nervous.
So the thing that is staring at me is I've got so few on the roadway corridor element, and one is going to go away. That Irvington project is going away. And I'm going to have to try to explain why that's the case and why that's good for us. Oh, and by the way, there's little or no specificity on the categoricals. Those are monumental tasks. I'm just telling you. Now, I will also throw out again, the 75 million, if you think about it, could be the same as the city, the excess revenue going to the city of Tucson. Because of the way I explained it, if we put the 75 million back in and off the top of the 2.46, that goes to replenish that pot, same as going to the city of Tucson, because that 60 million is for Irvington Road. That's all I'm saying. And we get to the point where I don't have to go and explain why one of them got cut out, right? That's why I was thinking I use the term reimbursed, probably not the right word exactly, but if we replenish the regional pot, so that 75 million is not on the table anymore, is not needed. The same as that money going to the city of Tucson, because then I can fund the Irvington Road, and the Irvington Road project is in it from the start. I don't have to explain why that was taken. So that's my suggestion. I know that causes some consternation for folks in the regional funds, et cetera, but you really get to the same place, in my opinion. And I think we roll the dice, and I'm comfortable rolling the dice on this, because I do think that the pessimistic is pessimistic, and I think there'll be there's a better than not chance that revenues will be exceeded, it's my opinion. And I'm okay suggesting that to the mayor and council to consider. But I'm gonna start with a negative when they see that 60 million coming off for Irvington on an already small list of number of projects. So I throw that out to you.
Is it coming off or is it just it's in the expanded bucket area? Because it's not out of the plan, it's just, well, the way the revenues come in, then it's already allocated and that's contingent on revenues come in year 3, we get them, right? If not, year 5, 6.
It's off the plan for the 2.46. And so when I go to the council and say, I'd like you to support this, or if I'm asking them to do that, and they look at the list, I'm gonna say, oh yeah, and by the way, we will potentially get.
Get these back in.
They're gonna come back and say, yeah, but right now that's out.
Got it, okay.
I'm just being honest with you, that's gonna be a headache for me, I'm just telling you. And I won't be able to support this the way that's.
Like what you're saying is you're gonna earmark as priority 1, any excess money going to Irving. So basically,
I mean, basically it replenishes that first 75 million is replenished back into the regional funds. And I think that's fair. That's okay. You know, because that way we at least get to that point. So in essence, in order for it to go to the city of Tucson, it would have to be 2.46 plus 75. I mean, basically that's kind of the way.
Actually, plus 60, right?
Well, I was saying 75, but yeah, 60 is the number. I'd have to look at the rest of it because I don't know what Shane. That extra. I got to run out with a fine tooth comb. But so that's my thought. And I think we can then get to a much closer to where we need to be, because then I don't have to explain that one piece. And then again, on the safety and active transportation, we can move those into the column, all of those specified projects that are City of Tucson projects. Then I can start tallying those, if you will, and then demonstrating the return on investment. And then there'll be a pot left. Now, back to your point, I think it was Carmine's point. One of the pieces that I thought about is if we know the projects that we're getting, I would even say to you and commit that we would not compete for the other, call them flexible dollars that are in those categoricals. That wouldn't be fair. And I would say to you that up front, that we have ours already identified, and then we're done with that, short of then that future cap or that future excess revenue.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's fair, and I can support something along there.
You would base the identification of projects in the categoricals off of whatever the allocation is of the 210. And as many projects as you could get in there under that ratio, you would name those projects.
Correct. Or as many of them as we can. I understand the need for flexibility, folks. Don't get me wrong. And I want to keep as much flexibility in my pocket going forward. But I've got to be able, if you remember the map that I showed you months ago now, I have to show distribution of investment on a couple hundred square miles, right? And so I'm going to need to do that. Now, if I can do that and leave myself flexibility with some of those dollars, that would otherwise have been allocated on this sheet, I'll do that just because it's good management, good business to move forward. So that's my opinion.
Mr. Chair, Farhad, refresh my memory. Did the board weigh in on the dollar allocation for corridor projects versus transit versus safety?
Yes, so early on, roughly, I would say about a year and a half ago, the board started with the starting point as a framework for 1.1 billion for corridor projects, then working down for the other elements, again, as a starting point. So I think up to now, what you have is very consistent with that, with some minor variations.
Because the last several projects, several different renditions of a plan, we've been up over 1.2 billion.
Yeah, I would consider that still within that range of what's been discussed, and the board has seen this and they haven't said anything differently, so.
So that's my suggestion on this, understanding the reservation about those regional funds. But I would suggest that you consider that. If you choose not to, I'm good with that. I just want you to know that's a reservation.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally understand, and I think, so it's the 60 million is the issue, right? 60 million in Irvington is the issue. That's what's at issue. It's not
60
necessarily.
million is what I've identified that he took out of our plan here, so I don't know about the other 15,
I don't
but
think
yeah, I mean,
anything else, but-
think about it, right? We had a plan.
That's 4 million a year as opposed to 5 million a year. I'm not trying to split hairs here, but.
Yeah.
4 million a year gets you.
Starting
50
in
million
year 5.
Starting in year 5.
Basically. So I don't know what kind of headache that causes you all with your folks. I think that, and I understand it, but I also think that, as Sam aptly pointed out, these are regional priorities, and those dollars go for regional needs, and particularly looking at some of the safety and active transportation, I think that it's a reasonable use of those dollars. I don't disagree with you, Terry, about the need for a safety net. I'm getting that. I'm not arguing that. Yeah, I think because of trying to shoehorn this massive program into very, very finite and limited resources, we've got to look at that. Otherwise, we've got to cut the program down. And I didn't hear anybody jump.
Well,
up and
if my second would entertain a modification in my motion that would allow for sweeping of some funding up to 60 million so that we can include Irvington, I would make a modification.
Before I call for a second on that, I would encourage you not to use the word sweep. And I'm being serious because I think sweep almost implies the entire amount. I think I would suggest that we allocate, because I think that is true, and that's what we're really talking about, is an allocation of a portion of that future revenue stream.
Again, words matter.
And as written here is the last 15 years, is that the first one?
Last 15.
Not the first 5, just the last 15. It's a 20-year programs.
Now I'll ask the second. Are you comfortable with that, Shane? So Shane.
I think it was, yes, I'll second that.
Feel more confident. You want to say but?
No.
No? Wow. All right, other concerns or comments? Liz, you have?
Yes, I was just gonna say that based on the motion, it doesn't capture some of the things that we brought up. And so I'm just concerned, and I think Carmine, you mentioned there's some things that are areas that we're not super clear on.
Do you want to clarify that so that the motion maker in a second can?
So just run the categoricals, that's not part of the motion unless it is. I didn't hear that.
So Terry, the question is, the categorical, the safety and transportation, mostly the movement of the Leeds to City of Tucson projects into specificity in that column. Are you comfortable with that?
Yeah, I think, at least twice, I've indicated that we're comfortable with the city identifying projects in the categoricals so that you have a council that's comfortable with the plan and so that you can sell it to your residents. I don't know exactly what that means in terms of how much of that is consumed. I do think it's important that we maintain some level of flexibility in there. I think if all of the jurisdictions throw all of their plans, and I think it is important, quite frankly, that the county, and they've mentioned that, Jan mentioned it before she left. I think Carmine has alluded to it. You know, they have a couple of categorical projects that would be important to put in there, but I think we need to identify those that need to go into categoricals so that there's support for the plan.
So go ahead, please.
Maybe maybe in concept, we move this this plan forward to count to the board with the understanding that we have to arrive at an allocation in the categoricals for the city of Tucson and for Pima County. And then the balance of that would be opened up for the process over the next 20 years for each of the agencies to weigh in outside of Tucson and the county. And then again, the excess would be what the excess is, right?
Yes, Carmine's here, he'll have to speak for Ken on if there, I'm willing to forego in that category, or categories, a future city of Tucson ask. I guess what I'm looking at is trying to get language so that we can do this thing is, I would just move the projects from
We did.
so all of the projects.
Yeah, all the little projects are sitting over here.
But we're okay with that as moving forward, all of those projects.
Well,
Sure. But more than the total. Yeah, the math doesn't work. Right. So that's the struggle, right? Because the math, just going off of sheet 2, the new modified plan, everything in orange right there, it's 258 million. And we've already established that
like,
it's 210. So it can't work that way.
that was the point I was gonna make. It's not all of this. This is all listed as if we see the optimistic outcome, then you would start using that extra money to do this. What I would suggest under what we've been talking about is once we land on what that ratio is in terms of an allocation or a bucket of money within this categorical for the city of Tucson and for the county, that would get moved back over. You know what I mean? That would be get moved back over into that left column as identified named projects for the county and for the city. And then the balance would be left to the rest of us to work off of over the next 20 years.
So that's gonna be a problem. Thank you, Carmine. You only have to hit me twice with 2x4 and then I listen. I understand now. So the 210 is the total, which was your point earlier.
Yes.
The 210 is the total. And if we move those projects, both cities and the counties over, then we're gonna far exceed that, which means there'll be no money left for
That we were in with the PMC modified.
everybody else.
Mr. Chair, so the 245 minus 35 million to the city of South Houston. The 2 county projects of interest are Camino de la Canela, line 87, so that's 4 point. And then also White House Community Road, 94, that's $1 million, so 5.8 million. If you round that to 6 million, right, that 210 goes down to 204. So if we can talk around what would be a proportional split of that 204, and if just to throw it out to start somewhere, we said 50%.
That's what I was thinking.
And say, okay, city, take 102 million and name those projects.
Right.
And then everybody is still eligible, right, to submit on an annual basis for consideration for projects. Does that move us closer along, right? Because in exchange for naming 5.8 million, $6.6 million in safety and active transportation, I'm not going to comfortably be able to say we won't ask for anything over the 20-year period from the remainder of that. So, I mean, if we were to take 102 million, city named those, plus the 2 county projects, then 50% of the bucket is still available.
Could we ask, I mean, I think this is reasonable, that before the county or the city would jump into the other 50%, that you finish those projects first. And then you jump into to the rest of the 50%. So, sorry, I'm just talking out loud, but it seems fair to me.
I think the other thing that maybe we haven't, but I think that we've forgotten about the additional 125 million that's not in the town of Sahuarita plan, right?
I think we used that in
No, we used it already.
the contingency.
Contingency and
And the
debt
debt
service.
service.
And debt service. That's where we got that.
And money like it's going out of style.
Dang it.
So let's think through this for a minute. So if we took the 2 projects out And you said it was the Camino Este White House?
Camino de la Canoa, line 87,
Yep.
and then it's White House Family Road 94.
Okay, so that's the 5.8 that you speak of. And you subtract that or add that to the 35, which is the city of South Tucson. That leaves us right at about 205, 204, 205.
You take 50% of that.
I'll be honest, I don't have a feel for it. See, part of the challenge that I've got is because we were so low on the roadway element, I loaded heavy onto the categoricals to show investment across the community. So if the city was getting 50% of the roadway elements, we'd probably be okay, but we're not. And if you do the math, you'll see that. And that's why I'm a little nervous and hesitant about saying, yeah, 50% of that category is okay going forward. See, it causes me some grief. I mean, in concept, it's fine. I mean, I understand what we're trying to do there. It would have to be a fair amount higher than that, to my gut. Again, we're taking these
So
individually, right? We're
Right.
taking them individually.
Just
and
working off your gut, what is that number? Not 50%?
Yeah, and it's probably not 100. Be honest. I'd have to look at it, to be honest with you, Shane. And I'm sorry, I'm not trying to be evasive here. Yeah, and I'm trying to look at it holistically. We're not investing or getting as much in this category, so I need to see how to decide. And I don't know if we can maybe take a quick break. Let me add these up and I can tell you, but I just don't have a feel for it right now. Doing it on the fly, I think is going to be a challenge. Sorry to do that to you all. I just don't know that I can support it though. Again,
I mean, I'm okay with
if it
the
were-
short break.
if it were linear and every category had that, then I'm golden, we're done, but it's not. And that's where I'm at.
I mean, so originally it was presented that 100% of that bucket would be open to everybody. And City of Tucson would get all the excess. But we're carving out at this point 50% plus any excess going to the City of Tucson. And I just want to be cognizant of the offering as a whole. So
Well, hold on a minute. Maybe I didn't understand that. Because we have always said from day one, well, day 32, that we needed to show the investment in the categoricals as specified projects in order for me to go back and say, this is the investment in the City of Tucson, because I'm not able to demonstrate that on the roadway corridor element. So I've never been off of that. I've always been saying the same thing on that, kind of like a broken record almost. And so that's what I'm basically saying. And so this coupled with that, coupled with this, I cobble together and then I say, okay, here's what it looks like. Return on investment, across the community and the amount. I mean, in concept, there is a number out there. I just don't know what it is without going through these. And I'm sorry. I wish I could tell you, hey, it's this percent. I just can't right this second.
Well, if we're gonna give a little on the future earth monies, we're gonna give on this, whatever that percentage is, then we're gonna have to do a percentage on the excess too. So, it can't be on all, so it's gonna have to be a percentage. So work up your numbers, I guess, wherever you're comfortable with, but it can't be all. I think it's gonna have to be.
take a 5-minute recess.
There's buying lunch.
Farhan is.
Take a 5-minute break. And then we'll come back here let's come back at 12. That's a 7-minute break. Okay. Gotcha. Get out of my mind.
Whoever you're trying to figure
And then, I would not.
So what I did then is just the 408 plus the 70.
It wouldn't have been acceptable if we didn't also. give them that. An in-house charge. Had this year, pilot plan is all approved. Oh, because we're gonna. Open it up at that point, then we'll have a circular.
I reduced that. Go research.
Promptly at 12:02. I think, going back to some of the points that were made, as the city of Tucson added up the projects that were listed in the roadway corridor element, taking the appropriate transit element to 610, piece of that, with existing service plus the BRT. And adding the 102, which would be 50%. The total number for the city of the 2.46 minus the deferred projects would be about 40%, which is problematic. So, right before the break, Jeff brought up concern about the share, if you will, beyond the initial amount being split. Conversation around that. I know we're all getting a little fried. We've been at it for a bit. Thoughts or comments on that, just in general?
We calculate their 40% at a 2.46 billion. I guess you got to take the deferred projects out of that calculation.
Correct.
So
That's what we did.
okay.
Yeah, we did that. Thank you, Jim. Look, here's the way, I've been very open with you, been very honest in terms of the approach. If the TMC would like to move this forward, I will entertain a motion. There's a motion on the floor in a second with all the caveats. I will not be able to support it, and I will express my concern, just like I've expressed it here. I will not work against it. I will come to the board and I will chat with the board if called upon or asked. And that will be my guidance to the mayor and the council. But I'm hopeful that you don't read that, not able to support that level as not supporting where I think we're headed, because I do think that we're headed in a good direction, a lot better than I thought when we walked in. And I very much appreciate that. It's just, I do think that it would be a challenge. It will be a challenge for me with my electeds and with the voters in Tucson. Jeff, you had a comment?
Yeah, I guess I know we put you on the spot to make a calculation.
What's that? Just a scope.
Yeah, exactly. And then, But you start taking out contingency, which is not allocated, take out the debt service aspect and take that out, even parts of the environmental that we don't know how that would be allocated, but when you start to look at the safety and the transit, that might be the percentage to really look at. And so I think that will help your numbers, might help you have some, selling the thoughts, because again, we don't know. And then I would suspect that a lot of that debt service will be for projects that support Tucson. A lot of that contingency will be to support project for Tucson. So I would just have, take those out of your percentage calculation, and that might help you. So anyway, there's one.
It's not a bad point. Can I say that's a good point, but no, I'm not going to say that. We can rerun those again. I'm just kind of telling you where I am at this point. I do feel strongly that and encourage you to include the specified projects for the city of Tucson. I know Terry had suggested that was part of his thinking, but it wasn't necessarily included in the motion. As long as we're all clear on that the city of Tucson projects will be specified. I think the biggest challenge there is to what level. We can prioritize those that are listed, and then as conversations continue down the path, we can have that discussion.
Mr. Chair, sure. If the city of Tucson isn't supportive or plans to support what we've talked about, why move all of those things forward? Do you think it helps the region get to across the finish line? I mean, if you don't support it here, why would the region support it? Why would your mayor support it at the board level if you don't support it here?
So unlike you all, I don't know exactly what my mayor's going to do on any given day. But my gut would be, and I appreciate Jeff's point. I think I will look at that and see where that falls in, because it's a good point that Jeff brought in terms of the dollars. But given what I've seen here and the lack of specificity and I use the term artificially, but a low allocation of safety and active, it's going to be hard for me to support it. So,
Low meaning 50% is low.
Based on the total, not based on that category.
Well, not based off of the 50%, but based off of the bucket.
On the bucket, the whole thing is a suggestion. Comment?
I'll just come back to the comment I made earlier. So we've taken the 125 million on the new projections. We rounded out contingency at 100 million. We brought debt service up to 77 million or 75 million, whatever the math is. We can pause, I believe, there and say to the board, we've gotten these things, right, we're in agreement on these things. This, I think it's really important for whatever recommendation that comes out of this committee to be unanimous to the board. I don't think it helps. The question you directed to Mike, I'll answer it from my perspective, my own personal opinion. I don't think it helps for us to put together a split vote plan to the board just to put something forward. I think we've got to pick this back up and come back to it and, ask maybe the city of Tucson to define more what that specificity is. We threw out for discussion a 50% split, right? The 102 million. So what is it then? If it's not that, what is it with what specific projects associated with it? Because that's what we need to drive towards in order for us to get a plan that has the specificity and that potentially we could support unanimously. I think that's usually, I think it's super important.
Let me throw this out. Thank you, Carmen. I appreciate that. I mean, there's no one in this room that loves these more than I do. But would you all be interested in maybe coming back? Could we come back tomorrow or Wednesday? Give us a chance to take a look at some of that, and maybe we come back with a little more info to hopefully get to a point of thumbs up. And I would be willing to meet early, 7:30, if that doesn't mess up people's calendars. But I'm just throwing that out as maybe, we could recess this until then. So it doesn't have to be a separate meeting. It's basically a continuation of this meeting. But we could also do a new meeting as well. We could advertise a new meeting. What's your pleasure on that? Any thoughts on that? And, you know, I understand Carmine's thoughts on, that's another option, right? We agree on these few things and we're still working on the rest. That can be recommended. Gary.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm certainly hearing what Carmine's mentioning here, and I do think that with the time that we have, I don't know that we're gonna get where we need to get. So I would be supportive of coming back tomorrow morning, and I mean, probably all gonna have to move stuff, but I think this is important. So if the group is willing to meet tomorrow or Wednesday to pick this back up and try and get it across the finish line, I'd be open to that.
My day starts at 7. I don't know about anybody else's.
There's an overachiever and all this.
Well, what he's not saying is he's off every Friday.
Oh, yeah.
It's
And what's evident
let's
is
not,
when he
yeah.
turns on his phone.
Yeah.
He's up there. Well, let me throw this out. Would you all be up for coming tomorrow at 7:30? Give you 30 minutes to drive in in your PJs. I mean, we could do it at 8.
Tomorrow's not gonna work for the county. That's.
Oh, you haven't voted?
Supervisor's meeting.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I can make it Wednesday. I don't know if Jan can make it, but I could.
Yeah,
That's just to be safe. I would rather post it.
The
have
24
hours notice, please.
That's fair.
So
That's fair.
24 hours from, let's say, 1 o'clock.
So how about Wednesday morning early?
I can do it.
Anybody not do it Wednesday morning early? Is 7:30 okay, or do you want to push it to 8?
Good either way.
For the sake of time, I give us as much time as we can. Yes.
7:30, I hear 7:30. Well, I heard 7 early, but we'll ignore that comment. 7:30. So 7:30 on Wednesday, that gives you plenty of time to post it. So why don't we do this, Terry, if you're okay with your motion, why don't we just hold it? I think Rick and the team have that identified and memorialized. And then we'll start there by rereading it when we come in. Wednesday morning, 7:30 here, and you'll repost it so that we're safe on that end. And hopefully we can get everybody in person, or as many as we can in person. Is there anything else for the good of the order today?
Mr. Chair, yeah, will we have the updated cash flow?
Specifically, what are you looking for?
Well, where we've changed some of the.
Take on.
Oh, okay.
We'll on it and bring it to the meeting.
Okay.
You'll have
And then,
much new information.
and in the meantime, what we'll do is we'll look through it, we'll dissect it. I'll take Jeff's suggestions to heart and see what that looks like, and then we'll come back and hopefully we start at 7:30. By 7:45, we're done. Dan, adjourned. Thank you for your time. Appreciate you. Yeah. That's more like it. Thank you all. Appreciate you.